Hello, everyone. Today we'll continue talking about Plato's Republic. So far we've looked at Cephalus and Polemarchus' proposals about the nature of justice. Both Cephalus and Polemarchus are playing the philosophy game with a lot of assumptions that Plato, the Socrates, have in place as well. And one of those crucial assumptions is that there is a correct answer to the question, what is justice? In other words, that justice has a nature that can be understood by human reason, and that the process of dialogue, of thinking, of putting forth evidence, reasons, examples, the process of ethical deliberation is a means for going about trying to understand and secure and that kind of knowledge, a better understanding of the nature of justice. So an assumption, to put it differently, is that morality is subjective, that there are moral facts in the world that are discoverable, and the reason is a guide to that. Um, Thrasymachus is the last main interlocutor with Socrates in Book One of the Republic, and he's going to challenge that assumption. He's going to deny that assumption. So let's look at Thrasymachus' engagement with Socrates about the nature of justice. Here's what Thrasymachus says: justice is the interest of the stronger. In a different way of putting this, as it's going to be put later in history, is something like might makes right. And might means like power. He who's in a place of power, political power, he who can make the rules for organizing societies, says Thrasymachus, does so in such a way that they only benefit themselves. People in power, regardless of political organization or political structure, are there to benefit themselves. So he has a very kind of egotistic conception of humanity. People always do what they do for the sake of benefiting themselves, and typically against others. And the benefiting part that Thrasymachus has in mind is something like accumulation of wealth and power and pleasures. So much more base kind of desires or goals. And Thrasymachus thinks we all have that. We tell ourselves stories about justice and virtue and goodness and what perfects the soul and so on, the kind of thing that Socrates says. We tell ourselves those stories just to have a good image of ourselves, but it's a faulty image, it's a deception. Deep down, we just care about power, wealth, pleasure, much more base kind of instincts. And the thing that we call justice, the rules that organize society, that we say it is just for you to follow the law, it is just for you to treat other people equally, and so on. Those are just the rules that were made by those that are in power. And those rules can change. Those rules have changed through time. Uh, Morality and justice included is socially constructed. There are no facts in the world about morality. Morality just is the result of activities and practices that human made, and is malleable, is changeable. During some period in time, those in power might inflict or impose a particular kind of rules of morality, in which they are the monarchs, they have all the power. And in that case, Thrasymachus thinks the justice is for the servants, for the ruled, to obey the powerful. And if society changes, we have a democratic system in which it is the people, the demos, the society, that chooses the rules. Then in that society, the socially constructed morality of justice would be to follow the will of the people, not the will of the monarch, and so on. So justice depends on society, is socially constructed. There are no moral facts. No society can be mistaken about the rules, because those are just the rules. Those are just the ways in which society structures itself. And crucially, it is the powerful members of society that decide or that bring about those dynamics, those rules. Justice is socially constructed, and it's for the sake of those that are stronger or more powerful. So it's a kind of dark conception of human society, and in particular of the nature of justice. And here are some of the quotes that Thrasymachus gives us. There are different forms of government. Sorry, the different forms of government make laws that are democratical, aristocratical, and tyrannical. So democratical governments make rules that benefit the demos, the people. Aristocratical governments, or from ways of organizing society, make rules that benefit the aristocracy. Tyrannical or monarchical governments make rules that benefit the monarch. And those that are in power, the demos, the people, the aristocrats, or the tyrant, or the monarch, they are the ones that decide, and they decide for their own sake. They make rules that benefit them. And then the society, members of society, just call those things justice. And it is just for the people in that group to obey those rules that are imposed by those that have the power. That's how the reality works, says Thrasymachus. Thrasymachus continues, these laws which they make for their own interest are the justice which they deliver to their subjects, and him who transgresses them they punish as breakers of the law, as unjust. So what it is to be unjust just is to break the law. Whatever the law says, the law by definition is correct because the law is imposed by those that have power and society is socially constructed. If I'm sorry, justice is socially constructed. If justice is socially constructed, then there are no such thing as unjust laws, because unjust laws presuppose moral facts that the laws do not align with or are not faithful to. But Thrasymachus says there are no such objective justice. There's just what people in power made. So to be just is to follow the law, which are the imposition, the rules that are imposed by the powerful. So, of course, Socrates is not happy with this. This is radically opposed to what Socrates thinks. And he has a very clever argument. Here's the clever argument that Socrates puts forth against this conception of justice. Uh, first premise in the argument: the rulers are fallible. Those that govern are fallible. They make mistakes. So sometimes they make laws that are not in their interest. Sometimes the rulers make laws, say, to tax breaks for the wealthy with the thought that that's going to benefit the rulers. Then that's what Thrasymachus thinks. But sometimes that's not the case. By making those laws, it upsets people and so on. Right? So sometimes the laws that are aimed at the interests of the stronger, according to Thrasymachus, misfire. There is no benefit for the stronger in the implementation of the laws. They're mistaken about what is in their interest. Here's a second premise, and this is part of Thrasymachus' story as just laid out. What justice is for the powerless, for those that are, that are under the influence, the political influence of the others, for the weak, for the, those that are dominated by the powerful, what it is for them to do something just is to obey the laws imposed by those that are powerful. For them to be just is for them to do that which is imposed on them by the powerful. So it is just for subjects, those that are subject to political power, to obey the law, right? That just follows from Thrasymachus' picture. If you put that together with premise number one, the observation that sometimes those in power make rules that are not in their own interest, it follows from those two claims that sometimes it is just for subjects to do something which is contrary to the interest of the stronger, and obeying the laws that are aimed at the interest of the stronger, but by a mistake of the stronger, they don't actually support the interest of the stronger. The subjects are doing something just by doing something that is contrary to the interest of the stronger. It just follows from Thrasymachus' observation. Okay, that just is the negation of the conception of justice that Thrasymachus put forth, right? Thrasymachus said, justice is what is in the interest of the stronger. And now we have an argument whose conclusion is justice is not what is in the interest of the stronger. And all of this came from Thrasymachus' own conception of justice in society and just in the way in which subjects should respond to power. So Socrates brings out an internal inconsistency in Thrasymachus' view. So this raises the question in dialogue about who is the strong? Who is this being or beings that justice is the doing things that are in their interest? What does it mean to be strong? And another interlocutor jumps in and said, well, wait a minute, here's a way of rescuing Thrasymachus' proposal. We should not think of justice as whatever is actually in the interest of the stronger, but merely justice is what the rulers think is in their interest. So justice is doing what the rulers think is in their interest. So if a ruler makes a rule that they think is in their interest, but they're mistaken about that, it would still be just for the subjects to follow the law. And there would be no inconsistency, right? That would just be a case in which justice is what the rulers think, but are mistaken about being in their interest. So there's no inconsistency here. But Thrasymachus does not like that. He does not think that's the right conception of strength or the strong as he conceives of them. So Thrasymachus says, certainly not. If a strong person makes a mistake, they are no longer strong. Part of the strength that he has in mind, this kind of this kind of role model that he has in mind of the one that has political power, is someone who's not delusional or is not deceived about what is in their interest. If they make rules that are contrary to what is in their interest, they're weak to that extent. So here's how he changes his proposal to combat or to respond to Socrates' clever argument. And I'm just labeling this Thrasymachus' new proposal for justice. So here's what Thrasymachus says. Justice is what is in the interest of the stronger, quae stronger. And quae is a Greek kind of expression that is not easy to translate to English. And you can roughly translate it as something like insofar as, but doesn't quite translate as well. So examples might help you get a sense of what it is to say something quae something. So the stronger quae stronger is infallible is the claim. The thought is that a person is strong to the extent that they make no mistakes. To the extent that they make mistakes, they're no longer strong. And this quae qualification applies to any characteristics. So a professor is a professor to to the extent that they teach. So a professor quae professor teaches. A student is a student to the extent that they study. So a student quae student studies. A baker is a baker to the extent that they bake. So a baker quae baker bakes, right? So you think of things in the world via the characteristic, being a doctor, being a teacher, and so on, via characteristic, and point out that they are what they are in accordance with the characteristic to the extent that the activities distinctive of the characteristics are done by the thing. So a person can be a doctor, can be a parent, can be, a male, can be all sorts of things, and they would do things qua the relevant characteristic. So the same person can be a man, a human, and strong. And to the extent that they're strong, qua strong, they wouldn't make no mistakes. To the extent that they're merely human, qua human, they will make mistakes because humans are fallible. So this rescues Thrasymachus' proposal because when the people in power make the rules that are not actually in their interest, they're not acting as strong qua strong. They're acting as humans qua humans, namely fallible beings. So those rules are not the ones that the subject should follow in those be just followings of justice. It is only the rules that actually benefit the strong that are the ones that bring about justice, claims Thrasymachus, because they're the ones done by the strong qua strong to the extent that they don't make mistakes. So this also rescues the proposal. But Socrates is not happy. He thinks, okay, he offers some more deeper kind of objections to Thrasymachus' proposal. And then Thrasymachus doesn't know how to answer to these. But let's look at Socrates' subsequent responses. And these are responses to the new proposal. Socrates points out that what it is to be a ruler qua ruler, and that is using the qualification that Thrasymachus brings forth about being a ruler, being in a position of government, having a position of political power. What is to be a ruler qua ruler is to care for the good of the ruled. That's the main claim. If the stronger is to be a ruler and the stronger qua stronger is the ruler qua ruler is going to care about the good of the ruled, and that's going to undermine a Thrasymachus' whole picture. But let's walk through this more slowly. What makes a ruler a good ruler is that they ruled well. And when you talk about a ruler qua ruler doing something, that's a way of talking about what it is to be a good ruler. So that's a weird thing to say, but if you think about any other example, so a shepherd, for example, here, a shepherd is a good shepherd to the extent that they care about the sheep. If the sheep keep dying, the wolf keeps breaking in and eating them, they're not a good shepherd. So a good shepherd is the one that cares for the good of the sheep. So a shepherd qua shepherd cares for the good of the sheep. And Socrates points out this is not peculiar about shepherds, it's peculiar about everything. A teacher is someone who teaches. A good teacher is someone who cares about the good of the thing that they're doing, namely the students' learnings, who cares about the good of the students. A builder is someone who builds. A good builder is someone who cares about the good of the building, right? Someone whose object the building is a good building. So it is the goodness of the object of the activity that settles whether the person is good at that very thing. So medicine is for health, the good of the body. Architecture is for buildings, they're good in the structure and so on. Being a shepherd is for the good of the sheep and so on. And Socrates points out this is universal. Any characteristic is such that what makes you be a good exemplar of that characteristic is that you do what the characteristic brings out and you do it well. A flute player is someone who plays the flute. A good flute player is someone who plays the flute well. So a quay flute player plays the flute well, is the main claim. But now if we go back to ruling to and govern, the art of ruling is aimed at the rule, right? What it is to rule is to be in a position of political power and for there to be people that are subject to your political power. So it must be aimed at the good of the ruled. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a good ruler. So thus, when a ruler is seeking his own interest, as Thrasymachus is putting forth, they're failing to be a good ruler. What Thrasymachus is pointing to is not a case of the stronger one being in control of the situation, but rather what he's pointing to is a case in which the ruler is a bad ruler. They're not acting as a ruler, qua ruler ought to act. That's the crucial part. They're acting as a ruler, kind of distorting the very thing that they're supposed to be doing, is doing. In a different way of saying that is to say that what Thrasymachus is describing the ruler that cares about their interest is not justice, it's injustice. Uh, Thrasymachus is taking injustice and is labeling it justice. That's all that he's doing when he describes the situation the way he does. And Thrasymachus has no answer to this. He doesn't know how to respond to this. In fact, he kind of gives up, as we'll see shortly. Let's look at more of what Socrates' own positive proposal of justice is. It's a thin one, but it's an interesting one. So here's what Socrates himself says. Justice is wisdom and goodness. It is the kind of thing that allows for friendship and the building of community and society. And he points out that even criminals need to have at least a minimum amount of decency and justice towards each other. Otherwise, the organization falls apart. Justice is essentially this kind of principle organization that allows for a group to be organized and to be harmonious. It requires wisdom and goodness. The lack of justice and justice undermines, destroys the very nature of the group. Furthermore, to the individual, Socrates claims, justice is the excellence of the soul. So this is Socrates' world. What makes the soul a good soul is the excellence of the soul, which is virtue, and justice is one of them. So what makes life worth living is having a good soul, because the soul is the better part of you, and the virtue, the justice, is the excellence of that thing, namely the soul. But now here's the new piece of evidence. Here's the new kind of what justice is. Justice is a soul that is harmonious. And to be harmonious is for the better parts of the soul to be in control of the lesser parts. And the better part of the soul is reason. The lesser part are the emotions or the passions. So a just soul is one in which reason governs action. That is, a person is a just person when they act on the basis not merely how they feel in the moment without thinking, but rather on the basis of their deliberate judgment about what is best, what they ought to do, when reason is guiding action, not merely the emotions of the moment. Um, and just soul is one where the passions take over the moral agency. And the examples that Plato has in mind are things like anger, lust, envy, jealousy. By and large, if you act purely on the basis of that emotion at the moment, the kind of emotion that the kind of action that those emotions recommend or they push, they motivate you to act, typically is the wrong one. If you're angry and you act on the basis of the anger, chances are you're gonna regret it. However, if you are angry and then stop and think about it, think about whether the anger is appropriate, whether reason approves of you being angry at the moment, or your reason approves of you doing the thing that anger recommends, and then you do it, you're likely not going to regret that, because if you act on the basis of reason, you're likely going to do the right thing. So if you're angry at a system because it is unjust, you're angry at you're indignant of the injustice of the system. If you just act on the anger, you may regret it. But if you stop and think about it, is it appropriate for anger to be directed at an unjust system? Reason is going to say, well, yeah, because injustice is indignant. You ought to be angry at and indignant towards that which is injustice. If you're angry because this crush, you ask a crush on a date and she said no, he said no, and you're angry, reason is not going to approve of that, right? You have no authority of other people to force them to go on dates with you. So reason is going to say, hey, you should not be angry. You certainly should not act on the basis of what anger recommends. Those are the kinds of examples that Plato has in mind when he's thinking about a harmonious soul. Harmonious soul is someone in which reason operates, guides, structures, and acts. An unjust soul is one that is ruled by the passions, typically the lower passions, anger, lust, and so on. Let's return to Thrasymachus. Thrasymachus does not know how to respond to Socrates' arguments. They seem pretty clever, they seem pretty smart. He doesn't know what to think. And now his picture has been turned upside down, right? It turns out the conclusion of Socrates' new objection is that what Thrasymachus describes is not justice. In fact, it's injustice. Morality is objective, and Thrasymachus' view is objective injustice. And Thrasymachus accepts it. So there's this shift, there's this change in Thrasymachus' way of thinking. He accepts that morality is subjective. He accepts that there is justice and injustice in the world, but then he holds on to his original view, not as a case of justice, but as a case of wisdom. Here's what Thrasymachus says. Consider further, most foolish Socrates, that the just is always looser in comparison with the unjust. Crucial that by the just person here, Thrasymachus means what Socrates means, not what he meant in his own proposal. He gives up in his proposal as a proposal of justice. Now he's going to put forth as a proposal of wisdom. So he grants Socrates pretty much everything up until now except wisdom. First of all, in private contracts, whenever the unjust is the partner of the unjust, you will find that when the partnership is dissolved, the unjust man has more money. And of course, Thrasymachus is right. We all would like to think that if, honesty is the best policy, meaning that if you do the right thing, like good things will come to you. And that does happen sometimes, right? People like good people, and if you're honest, people treat you well. And there's a lot of that. However, if you're clever and unjust, you might deceive others into thinking you're honest and then get the benefit of being treated as an honest person, but then stab them in the back whenever you can and get away with it, right? So if your objective in life is accumulation of wealth and power and sensual pleasure and things like that, if you're a clever, unjust person, you will get more of that than if you're a just person. Thrasymachus, unfortunately, is right here. Thrasymachus continues. For mankind censures injustice, fearing that they may be victims of it, not because they shrink from committing it. So Thrasymachus has a very kind of dark conception of human motivation. We want to hurt others. He thinks we see someone that we're attracted to, we want to go to bed with them, and if they have a partner, we want to kill the partner to go with them. Right? This is very nasty. We see a cool car, we want to beat the person that has the car and take it for us. We want to do all of those nasty things and abuse others and just have control over them. However, we don't, because we'll get in trouble. We'll go to prison. Several of them come together and they will empower us. So we preach justice, not because we believe in it, but because we don't want to be the subjects or the sufferers of injustice. Pretty dark picture. That's what Thrasymachus thinks we're actually doing. Conclusion for Thrasymachus: injustice is more advantageous than justice. The wise person is the one who pretends to be just, but treats people with injustice and gets away with it. They'll be foolish if they get caught, but if they get away with it, that's true wisdom. So here's Thrasymachus through wisdom. True wisdom is being unjust while appearing to be just. The good life for Thrasymachus is characterized by maximization of wealth, power, and pleasure mainly. And the best way of attaining those things is by appearing to be just and getting those benefits, but being unjust every time you can and get away with it. Socrates is not convinced. Here's what Socrates says. For my own part, I openly declare that I am not convinced, in that I do not believe in justice to be more gainful than justice, even if uncontrolled and allowed to have free play. In other words, if you think of two life possibilities, one in which you're a just person, you're a good person, your virtue, your soul is growing. The other one in which you follow Thrasymachus, you pretend to be good, but cheat your way around and get away with it. Thrasymachus thinks the first life is the better one. Why? Because the unjust person, the Thrasymachus character, only gains things of the body, right? Wealth, power, pleasure. They're all kind of goods for the body. They're satiating bodily desires, but it harms the soul. They're vicious. They're unjust. The soul, however, is the better part and more excellent virtue. And Socrates doesn't emphasize this here, but he also means if you have a good soul, if you're virtuous, you would have friends, right? People would actually like you. People want to be with you. No one wants to be a friend of the Thrasymachus followers, right? You don't want to be a friend of the Thrasymachus followers. Even if you follow Thrasymachus, you want to, the reason you want to appear justice to others is because no one's going to like you if they realize you're a Thrasymachus follower. You're just unjust and stabbing people in the back. And if that's your character, you cannot develop true, long-lasting, intimate, invested relationships. You cannot be a good friend. You cannot be a good lover. And it is the high quality of your soul, the virtue of your soul, that enables you to make deep connections with people, to make friendship, to make loving relationships. And all of that is built into the good life, the virtuous person. Um, and Socrates thinks that's the right way. That's the good decision. That's what you should aim at, not what Thrasymachus gives you. So here's the main question for you guys. Think of two lives. Life A, Thrasymachus' ideal, the unjust person who pretends to be just and gets away with it, but he cheats his way. He has a relationship with the person he wants, but he cheats behind their back and they don't know, and so on, right? They cheat their way through life and get away with it. So they maximize pleasure, power, and wealth. That's course of action A, life project A. Here's a different life project B, Socrates' life project. uh, you're a good person. You strive for virtue, intellectual, moral, aesthetic. You develop the grounds for good relationships, family relationships, and so on. And you regard that as the proper object of your pursuits. Um, these are mutually exclusive life projects. You cannot have them both. They're inconsistent in tension with each other. Here's the basic question for you. And this is a question that Socrates addresses Glaucon, which is actually Plato's brother. Which sort of life, which kind of life would you prefer? So I invite you to do a little journal exercise. Take a moment, take a few minutes, take out a journal and start thinking about these two life trajectories. Taking Socrates' wisdom as a guide to life, or taking Thrasymachus' wisdom as a guide to life. Think of yourself 10 years down the line, 20 years down the line. Uh, would you be happy with yourself? Would you prefer the kind of life that Thrasymachus recommends or the one that Socrates recommends? Take it seriously, think about it. Do the personal journal exercise. Don't show it to anyone. Of course, this is for your own. I'll stop here. I'll see you next time. Bye.